Danny Trejo, the indomitable symbol of Hollywood. His face is unmistakable, an embodiment of sheer willpower and unshakable resolve. A man who once commanded silence from audiences around the world the moment he stepped onto the screen. From the seething fury of Machete to the razor-sharp menace of Navajo and Desperado, to the unforgettable moments etched into Heat, Con Air, and From Dusk Till Dawn, Danny Trejo isn't just an actor. He is a force of nature, a living testament to the boldest era in cinema. His eyes speak volumes, as if each story is burned into his soul by fire. His silence carries a weight, a power that the world cannot ignore. And the name Danny Trejo has been permanently engraved in the history of film. A legacy of a man who rose from the ashes with unwavering determination and an unbreakable spirit. Yet, behind the spotlights and applause, there lie wounds that never fully healed. 4 broken marriages that shattered his faith in love. Betrayals that crushed his heart to its core. A deep abyss of addiction that once dragged him to the precipice of death. Scandals that tore apart his pride. Financial ruin that relentlessly loomed over him. And a darkness that still lurks in the quiet hours of the night. Now, at the age of 81, Danny Trejo no longer fights for fame. Instead, he battles a new chapter, a struggle tougher than any role he has ever portrayed. A warrior burdened with scars that will never fade, haunted by the ghosts of his past that no spotlight could ever obscure. And behind those eyes, what truths remain hidden? What storms still rage within him? The answers are tragic, haunting, and unforgettable. If you still admire the legend who once conquered the screen, hit like. A tribute to a fighter whose fiercest battles were not on screen, but in life itself. It's heartbreaking to realize that some lives are written before they even begin. Danny Trejo was born on May 16, 1944, in the working-class neighborhood of Echo Park, Los Angeles, where poverty pressed against every wall and warmth was a distant dream. By the time he was a year old, the small house he lived in was already overcrowded, filled with relatives, thin blankets, shared mattresses, and the suffocating weight of survival. Money vanished faster than it appeared. Tempers flared under exhaustion, and kindness was too rare to hold on to. The adults around him bore scars they never spoke of, and the emotional ground beneath him cracked more each day. In that corner of Los Angeles, life didn't unfold. It staggered, it trembled, and it braced itself against the relentless grind. For Danny, the world didn't begin with comfort. It began with the cold, harsh truth of uncertainty. That uncertainty morphed into chaos when, in 1945, a violent incident involving his father tore his fragile family apart. Before Danny could even walk, his family fled California in fear, drifting across Texas through borrowed rooms and temporary rentals where the walls were thin and the nights even thinner. Meals were scarce, silence was heavy, and nothing lasted long enough to feel like home. Life on the run carved something deep within him. Something that wasn't just fear, but the feeling of being unmoored from everything, from the world itself. When his father surrendered and the family returned to Los Angeles around age 3, normalcy remained elusive. The new home was worn, the adults worn thin, and the air was thick with unresolved anger. Danny wasn't surrounded by safety. He was surrounded by storms disguised as ordinary days. The storm worsened when, at age 4, he was sent to live with his grandmother in a cramped house teeming with relatives. The house was loud, the winters bitter, and emotions shifted like fault lines beneath his feet. His grandfather's temper erupted without warning, forcing Danny to navigate a world where every sound could signal the beginning of another fracture. With no steady parental love to anchor him, invisible wounds formed, quietly settling in his heart, the kind that endure a lifetime. In the midst of this chaos, the one person Danny clung to was his uncle Gilbert, charismatic, magnetic, and swaggering through life as if he were the world's most unbreakable man. To a child starved for belonging, Gilbert felt like salvation. Years later, Trejo would confess, "He was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me." A statement loaded with every wrong turn, every confusing signal, and every moment of misplaced hope. Gilbert gave him attention, identity, and a sense of being seen, but he also opened the door to a world far darker than any child should be exposed to. There was no anger in Trejo's later reflections, just an unflinching honesty that cut deeper than blame. "Everything in my childhood felt like survival," he would say. A truth stripped of ornament, simple and devastating. His world wasn't built on comfort. It was shaped by uncertainty, by adults battling their own invisible wounds, and by the quiet ache of needing protection that never arrived. Those hardships, hunger, instability, and the relentless search for a place to belong pressed into him, until they ignited a fire he could never extinguish. In a home where safety flickered and affection appeared only in brief, fragile sparks, Danny Trejo learned the earliest rules of endurance: stay alert, stay standing, and never let the darkness close in. Amidst the cracks of those formative years, something unbroken stirred within him. A strength neither named nor recognized at the time, but fierce enough to carry him through a lifetime. The wounds of his early years followed Danny into the streets, shadowing every step he took. By the time he was 8, the only steady presence in his life was his uncle Gilbert, just 6 years older but towering in the eyes of a boy who desperately needed protection. Gilbert gave him attention, belonging, and a sense of identity, something Danny had long been deprived of. But with that identity came peril. Gilbert led him into a world of dangerous substances, reckless thrills, and toxic circles where the line between love and destruction was dangerously blurred. Trejo would later say, "He was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me," capturing the heartbreaking reality of a child reaching for love, only to find chaos instead. Under Gilbert's influence, Danny was thrust into a life where danger became familiar, where chaos was normal, and where a boy's need for guidance was met only by shadows. As adolescence approached, the streets of Echo Park shaped Danny with a force he was too young to resist. By age 10, he was arrested, swallowed by a system that saw his mistakes but ignored the pain behind them. By age 12, the harmful habits he'd been drawn into wrapped around him like chains. The neighborhoods he roamed, Echo Park, Temple Street, Mission Park, were battlegrounds defined by unspoken codes and volatile tensions. In this world, everyone was tough, but people feared the crazy ones, as Trejo would later recall. And unpredictability became his armor. This volatile life wasn't a choice. It was the only world available to a boy with no other options. Nights dissolved into survival, days blurred into consequences, and each misstep tore another piece from the future he once dreamed of. Prison arrived, not as a surprise, but as the inevitable conclusion of a life built on misdirection, instability, and despair. In the mid-1960s, after a dangerous encounter with undercover agents, Danny was sentenced to nearly 10 years in some of the harshest prisons in the country: Folsom, Soledad, and ultimately San Quentin. San Quentin wasn't just a prison. It was a furnace of rage, fear, and broken souls. To survive, Danny turned to boxing. His fists, sharpened under Gilbert's misguided teachings, became his refuge. In the ring, he rose to become the lightweight and welterweight champion of the yard. But even victory couldn't ward off the darkness. During a riot in 1968, a split-second decision, throwing a small rock into the chaos, nearly destroyed him. He was placed in solitary confinement, in the section reserved for those facing the gravest penalties. For the first time in his life, Danny believed he might never see the light of day again. In that suffocating solitude, with only his breath and the weight of every past mistake pressing in on him, he whispered his first prayer: "If you're real, let me live." It wasn't a plea for freedom, it was a plea for transformation. And in that moment, for the first time, a fragile spark of hope flickered against the overwhelming darkness. No one came forward to testify against him, and the charges were dropped. A moment of grace Danny would never forget. When he stepped out of prison in 1969, the sunlight felt unfamiliar, as if the world was giving him one last chance to rise. With nothing to his name but fragile sobriety, he realized that if he wanted his life to mean something, he would have to rebuild it, one honest step at a time. He threw himself into recovery programs, learning humility, responsibility, and the courage to look at himself without excuses. He took any job that kept him grounded: landscaping, laboring, cleaning, work that didn't promise much but gave him the dignity of earning his own way. In those long days and quiet evenings, Danny began to understand something that had eluded him for so long: that true strength wasn't about surviving chaos, but about choosing not to return to it. Through service and mentorship, he found a purpose he never expected: helping others escape the same darkness he once inhabited. He became a counselor, sitting with people whose stories mirrored his own, offering not advice but the gift of shared experience. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't glorious, but it was honest, steady work, healing in ways Danny could never have predicted. And what grew inside him wasn't the fierce strength he'd learned on the streets or in the yard, but a quieter, steadier kind of strength. a clarity, compassion, and the will to choose a better path day by day. In those years of service, Danny Trejo wasn't chasing fame. He was repairing the past piece by piece, scar by scar, and in doing so, he finally began to understand the man he was meant to become.